So good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us for the final session of Listen, Dear Esteemed Pious Women with Rabbanit Leah Sarna. As a reminder, if you're joining us here on Zoom in the room, I will be sending you an invitation to become a panelist. That does not obligate you to do anything. That does not take anything away from you. It just gives you more options. So you can share your camera if you would like to. You don't have to, but it is appreciated to have faces in the classroom. You'll also be able to unmute yourself when we have time for questions, answers, discussion, etc. Otherwise, you're more than welcome to use the chat. If you're joining us on Facebook Live, hi, you can put your questions and comments in the comment section directly below this video. We do ask, of course, that if you are here on Zoom with us and you are not intending to share your audio, please do stay muted. I'm happy to help you to do that. And without further ado, Rabbanit Sarna, please take it away.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm going to share my screen. So today we're going to do something really ambitious. In the last two classes, we mostly just looked at the first, we looked at the introduction, and then we looked at that first chapter. And the reason why we spent so much time in the first chapter is that Rabbanit Rebecca describes the first chapter as like the stem of her menorah, and then there's another 6 chapters like coming out of it. And so I felt like, oh, if this is the stem, then that should be where we focus. And today we're just going to get little tastes of all the other 6 chapters. So obviously each one of these has so much in it. I was like really spending time choosing what to teach from the children chapter because there's just a lot in there. And if you were wondering whether like young moms in shul in the year like 50 had the same issues that we do now, the answer is like hardcore yes. It's literally identical. Like what she's like, well, what should you do if you're davening the Amida and your kid starts screaming? And I was like, wow. All right, relatable content. Anyway, so I didn't bring that for you here, but if you are gonna like pick up this book, and say like, what is in there that Rabbanit Leah did not get to, I would definitely recommend the children chapter. It's phenomenal. And I'm working on like a book with materials for like parents to study, and definitely a lot of that is going to end up in there, but we are not unfortunately going to get a chance to really look at it in depth tonight. Okay, so as I previously mentioned, each of the like branches of her menorah book, they're each about a different relationship. So we're just gonna have like little tastes of each of them. So the first one is, and also the you, it's so special when the you is a woman. I feel like rarely do I get to teach texts where the you of the text is a woman, but in this text it is. So right, so like the woman's the like center person, and she has to be like centered within herself with wisdom of the soul and wisdom of the body, and she's inherently a builder by nature, and it's such a great like parsha tie in her sense that women are inherently builders, and that's why Miriam, when God promises Shifra and Pua, Vayas lahem batim, like that they will have houses, and then the midrash understands them to be Yocheved and Miriam, that Miriam, and then the midrash identifies Bezalel as her great-grandson. And then what's Bezalel doing in our parsha but literally building like the house of houses, the Mishkan. So that's very cool also that like he gets to do that because of his like strong woman builder ancestors. So I just think that's like really awesome. Okay, so what do you build? You build all of these relationships. So the first one is your marriage. So here we go. I give you like the introduction to her chapter. So this is the next chapter, which will speak of how a woman should relate to her husband if they want to grow old with each other with respect. Good goal. The verse says, property and riches are bequeathed by fathers, but an efficient wife comes from the Lord. In Yiddish, this means one can certainly inherit a house and property from one's parents, but a prudent woman must be earned from God, blessed be his name. And I brought you the Hebrew here. Bayit v'hu nachalat avu u'mehashem isha maskalet. As I wrote above, a woman can prevent much with her wisdom. For one, she must always do right regarding her body. She must also consider her soul and remember that this world is not important, but the world to come is. King Solomon, peace be upon him, said about this, the wisdom of woman builds her house, but folly tears it down with its own hands. We saw that's our verse that we've seen over and over again. Right? And that's the like female wisdom is builder wisdom. That's like this big theme that she comes back to over and over again. And this is one of her favorite verses. And we also saw her drasha on the plural of chachmot. So, right, in English, we often say like the wisest of women or something like that. But she says, no, it's because women have two chachmas. They have chokhmata guf and chokhmata nefesh, like wisdom of the body, wisdom of the soul. Okay. So the Gemara explains this verse as follows. The wisdom of women refers to the wife of Un ben Pelet, and foolishness is Korach's wife. This is why every pious woman should convince her husband not to associate with any bad men. As our sages say, distance yourself from a bad neighbor and do not befriend a wicked man. That is what happened with Korach's wife. She provoked and badgered him to fight with Moses, our teacher, peace be upon him, for which she received her due payment. The wife of On ben Pelet did the opposite. She did not want to allow her husband to fight. When Korach came to call her husband, she stood with her hair out as if she wanted to comb it to make sure he would have to run away. That is how she saved her husband. So that's we're going to see that Gemara inside in a moment. That's right here, Sanhedrin 109b. But what that midrash is wondering about, which Rabbanit Rebecca doesn't have to say, is that at the beginning of Parshat Korach, you have this list of all of the like rabble rousers, and there's this guy On ben Pelet who's on the list, and then you never hear from him again, which is like one of the big mysteries of Parshat Korach. What happened to On ben Pelet? And so the midrash is going to come along and say it's actually all about the women. You want to really understand Parshat Korach, you got to know about the women involved. Parshat Korach is a women's story, which is like awesome. And so Rabbanit Rebecca to like love this story. So here's how it goes. So Rav says, Amar Rav, we're in the Gemara now. Owen ben Pelet ishto hitzilto. Owen ben Pelet, his wife saved him. Amrale, his wife said to him, my nafkalach mina, what is the difference to you? Imar Rabba Antamida, Imar Rabba Antamida. If Moshe is the great master, then you're his student. And if Korach is the great master, then you're his student. Like, who cares? You can learn from both of them. You belong to both of them. Like, just give it a rest. Don't need to have an uprising. Un said back to her, Amarla, my avid, what should I do? Havai be'etzav ishtabai behadayu. Right, I was one of the ones who took counsel, and I took an oath that I would be part of them. So here's how the midrash here is accounting for his being listed at kind of at the top of Parshat Korach. He kind of was sworn in to the uprising brotherhood, whatever. So she says back to him, Amrle yadana dekula kedishta kedishta. She says back to him, I know the entire assembly is holy, as it's written, and that's Korach's claim, right? The whole nation is holy. Who put you in charge? Amralai, so she said to him, I know the whole nation is holy. She said to him, to sit. I'm going to save you. Ashkite Chamra, she gets him drunk, like all good savior of the Jewish people women do. Kind of similar. Now she's like Yehudit or like Yael, right? She gets him drunk. The Arvite and she gives him wine. She gets him drunk. The Agnite Gavai, and she lays him on a bed. Otva al Bava, and she sits by the door. Vesatartal Messiah, and she exposes her hair. Kol da'ata chazia, and anyone who came by would see her and her hair. Hadar adahachi, and then they would kind of like turn around, like they would see her hair and be like, oh no, because if she says, like, if if the whole nation is holy, then they won't want to look at my hair, and that will discourage them from coming in here. So then I'll expose my hair, and somehow that's her righteousness. Like, she saves her husband by like compromising herself almost, and kind of taking advantage of the righteousness of everyone else. Like, whatever, we could spend an entire hour on this midrash in and of itself. So I'm going to keep going, but there's so much to unpack here. Really fantastic. But in the meanwhile, right, she with her like hair power is repelling everyone from their tent, and and while that's going on, the earth swallowed up everyone else, but not On Ben Pelet. But Korach's wife did the opposite. So then we have Itzitei de Korach, Amrale, the Korach's wife said to him, Chaze mai ka'avid Moshe, do you see what Moshe is doing? Malka, he makes himself a king. To his brother, he makes his brother the priest. The Kana Rabba, he makes him the high priest. And to the children of his brother, to his nephews, he makes them the like second tier Kohanim. Truma, and if Truma comes, Amar to have a Kohen, that if like people give food donations, he says that should go to the Kohen. Iatu Meiser, and if Meiser comes in, a tithe comes in, so that should be for the Levium. But what happens then? The Shakil to Atun. Amar Havu Chad Miyod LeKohen, right then, right? Meiser comes in, and that's actually for you guys, the Levium, and then Moshe comes and says, no, you have to give 1/10 of that to the Kohanim. But the guy is like, and furthermore, he shaves your hair. Right? So he shears your hair and he waves you guys around because you do a waving of the priests and of the Levites also a little bit, mostly the priests. And he just treats you really, really treats you very badly. And then Korach argues back to her. He says, no, it's not that bad. He does the same thing to himself. He also shaves his hair. He he all this belittling stuff he does to us also happens to him. It's not so bad. And then she says back to him, no. It's all right. She says, she says, it's all done for his own prominence. He also says, like, let me die with the Philistines, but he's really only willing to humiliate himself in order to humiliate you. Anyways, she keeps arguing more and more, like all the classic like Korach arguments, they start to put into her mouth, right? That like the classic midrashic Korach argument about like what if do I need tzitzit with techelet if I'm wearing an entire garment with techelet? So that's what's happening here, that they put that all of a sudden into her mouth, that she even gave Korach all of his reason to be angry, and she riles him up. And then the midrash here says, so who is the wisdom of woman who builds her house? Zo ishto shel Un ben Pelet. That's the wife of Un ben Pelet. Ve'evel be'adat harsana zo ishto shel Korach. And if Folly plucks it down with his own hands, this is the wife of Korach. So here we have examples of two women who are fully capable of just destroying their husbands' lives with their own hands if they are Korach's wife. And on the other hand, you have Un ben Pelet, who even humiliates herself in order to save her husband, and she is the wise woman who builds up her house. Okay. So in summary, she says, every pious woman can learn from all the issues that I've written here, that she should bring her husband to good deeds, discourage him from bad things. She should not tell him about everything that goes wrong in the house. She should excuse him from involvement, since nothing good comes from a fight. And then she continues, this is why every woman should beware not to sin against her husband, and all the more so against other people. When she sees him do something improper, she should disallow it, because a pious wife makes her husband pious. I would say if she has one kind of theory about being a spouse, it's that a pious wife makes her husband pious. She should discuss everything with him amicably. He will certainly obey her. That's kind of amazing, right? Like the vision is you're protecting your husband, you're making him pious, and your goal is to make him obey you, which is kind of the opposite of how we normally think about gender in marriages, particularly in these times. But she really kind of imagines that to be almost egalitarian. If it should be that he will obey her and she him, they have peace and harmony, and then they will be privileged together to have good fortune, blessings, and success in all their undertakings for many years. They will merit having children who will be Torah scholars, which is the greatest wealth and happiness. And the only one, blessed be he, loves when marriage is consummate in love and affection and in his service in order to observe his holy Torah. This is the purpose of creation, and this should all occur quickly in our days. Amen. And then this verse will be fulfilled. On that day, there should be one Lord with one name, right? It's as if she's finishing Alinu Bayoma Huya Hashem Echad Shmo Echad. That's the end of her chapter. The end of the chapter is that blessing for like the unity of God. And we're going to see later that she quotes the Rishit Chochmah. Like she has access to Lurian and Kabbalah. And so she's interested in like the unity between God and the Shekhinah and the unification of God that comes out of that. That comes out of that way of thinking. Okay, so in summary, our taste of her chapter on what it means to be married: be yes like On Ben Pelet's wife, don't be like Korach's wife, and your husband's piety and success is entirely dependent on you because you are the builder of the home. Okay, mostly I just love that Gemara about Korach's wife and On Ben Pelet's wife. And I love that she knows that and brings it in. I love that it then quotes her like favorite verse that she's always coming back to. And she clearly, sometimes in the commentary here, you have like all these questions, like, does she really know the Gemara? Because when she quotes Psukim, she quotes them in Hebrew and translates them. But when she quotes the Gemara, she just says it out in Yiddish. She says, it says the Gemara, and then she talks in Yiddish. And so the question is, did she have access to the Gemara in the original? There's not totally any way to know that, but clearly she had access to the Gemara enough that she didn't just know that, like, there's this idea about On Ben Pelet's wife and Korach's wife. She knew that it was tied into this verse that she's been playing with over and over again. So that's like a pretty impressive level of Gemara knowledge, just for what it's worth. Okay, moving right along. Chapter 3, parents. How a woman and her husband should spend their time with their father and mother, so that God, blessed be his name, should lengthen their years in this world and the world to come. I should mention that there is a long story contained in this chapter, and there's actually some people who quote this book not so long after it was published, like presumably while you could still buy it, make reference to that story, like, you should buy this book, it has this great story in it. I didn't bring it for you because it's quite long, but definitely like an interesting read and parable about how people should be treating their parents. Okay, so RC just said, with the measurement a person measures, he will be measured. And I brought that for you. Tanya Rabbi Meir Omer b'midah she'adam modedim lo, in accordance with the measure the person meets out for others, the heavenly court meets out for him. Okay. This means in Yiddish, how a person measures another, so too he will be measured. The way he treated his father, he will be treated. This is why every pious person should be warned not to abuse or disrespect her or his parents. One should tell this to young women in particular. A poor mother does her part. When her daughter has a rough time, she gives her the shirt off her back. Afterwards, when the daughter has a husband, she doesn't think of making a living decently with God's help, but relies once again on her father and mother. But a God-fearing woman remembers, my father and mother have always done enough for me. If I were fortunate enough to be able to fulfill the commandment of honoring father and mother, I would gladly do it with all my heart. And if she cannot do so with her money, she should do so with her body and should say, my dear mother, let me do that. I'm young and strong, and you are now old and worn out. Cool. But see, due to our many transgressions, some undutiful daughters who watch while their mothers work until they're ready to keel over. Our Gemara says about that, happy is he who did not see his mother and father. This means in Yiddish, happy is he who did not see his mother and father. I should mention, I said before that when she quotes the Gemara, she doesn't quote it in Aramaic, but she does quote it in Hebrew, and that's what she's doing here. So the same way that we have Rabbi Meir, she quotes B'midash Adam Mudin Mudidim Lo, and here again, so Rabbi Yochanan says, Ashrei mi shelo Hama'an. It's in context, so it's hard to understand. So Rabbi Yochanan is saying that about his parents. Happy is the one who never saw them. Rabbi Yochanan, and then the Gemara tells a little story about Rabbi Yochanan that he never saw his parents. Ki ibarto imo meit aviv, yoladeto meit imo. This horrible story about the birth of Rabbi Yochanan. We always tell about Rabbi Yochanan, oh, he was so beautiful, oh, his relationship with Rish Lakish, but actually the beginning of his life must have been quite hard and traumatic. He grew up without any parents. His father died while his mother was pregnant, and then his mother died in childbirth. So he came into this world without like a parental support system. It's a very sad thing about Rabbi Yochanan. But Rabbi Yochanan says this is in the context of the Gemara's main discussion about kibbud av va'im, about honoring our parents. And there in that discussion, Rabbi Yochanan says, wow, kibbud av va'im is so hard. I'm so glad I don't have to do it because I never saw my parents. But where she takes it is that it actually seems like the way she's taking it is that parents would be lucky if their children disappeared, because what she sees is undutiful daughters who watch while their mothers work until they're ready to keel over. She sees a dynamic where kids are taking advantage of their parents. The parents are just giving selflessly and selflessly and selflessly to their children. And then you have these parents who are, whatever, working themselves to the bone for their kids. And truly it would be better. When Rabbi Yochanan says it, he says, oh, I'm so lucky I don't have to do kibbud av va'im for my parents. But she's seeing it as actually the parents would be lucky if they didn't have to see their kid anymore, right? She's bringing kind of a counter read to Rabbi Yochanan, right? But the ideal is not that separation. The ideal is a world in which kids are supporting their parents and working with them and showing gratitude to them. That's the ideal relationship between children and their parents. And then she and it's pretty strong what she has to say about children and parents. And this last piece, and so, dear women, please do not take amiss what I have written or that I have admonished you. I mean this by no means negatively, since my intention is purely good. I do not want to generalize, God forbid, because most women are truly righteous and are punctilious about their good deeds. One does not need to rebuke them or tell them anything. They know everything themselves, 10 times better than what I have written. Rather, my intention is to find the one among these thousands who does not. I hope to God, may his name be blessed, that my words enter her ears and that she follows me. My effort will then have been worthwhile, and I might also gain some merit for it. Amen. And that's her way of saying, yeah, I said some really harsh tochla here. I really laid it out. But if that wasn't for you for some reason, it didn't resonate, that's okay. So that's what she has to say about children and their parents, which is, it seems to be what she's saying is children really just not giving to their parents, and she thinks it's really bad. And she really kind of uses very strong language about that. Okay, so on to the next, because today we are just getting a quick little tour. Okay, so now we're going to talk about in-laws. So, and here we are, chapter 4. We see the same thing every day in front of our own eyes. Wicked people who have no fear of God, as are common due to our many transgressions, and who provoke disputes between people, including between daughter-in-law and mother-in-law. So it seems like, right, she should be talking to the daughter-in-law about how to treat the mother-in-law. But in fact, she starts out by saying, this chapter is for everyone. this chapter is even for people who are just like gossip mongers, or if a daughter-in-law comes to say, oh, my mother-in-law is so annoying, which, like, we're going to be honest, we hear that all the time, right? What are you supposed to do in that situation? Right. So she says one thing that she hears is people saying, do not let her become accustomed to treating you or your, it should be treating, not teaching, to treating you or your husband poorly, and they provoke one another from which nothing good comes, only dispute and quarreling. So she's seeing a dynamic in which people are complaining to each other about their mothers-in-law, and then each one like riles up the other and says, don't let her treat you like that. Okay, you don't let her treat you like that. Okay, we're gonna fight up against our mothers-in-law. And the Meneket Rivkah is really against. She says, who can measure the evil that comes from that? God protect us. On the contrary, a pious person should rebuke them and make peace between them and say, don't take it so hard. It would be better if they speak like that and make peace among people. Then they will also merit having peace in their own households proportionally to their actions. Peace is the goal of everything, and so all our prayers end with shalom. If it were only so that peace would exist among all people, then all the blessings with which God, may his name be blessed Israel, would be fulfilled for us, and we would merit the redemption that will create peace in the entire world. Amen. So she has, it's interesting, like, shift almost, because it feels like so often she's talking to like the person who's at the kind of like the center of the menorah, but here she's saying actually this is like a community of women problem, because, and maybe in a sense, right, it's normal for women to struggle with their mothers-in-law, but they actually need reinforcement towards creating peace. What they don't need is other people telling them, like, getting them angry and spurring on the fight. No, that's not helpful at all. The helpful thing, if you want to be a good friend to your friend who is struggling with her mother-in-law, try and encourage her to make peace. That's the Meneket Rivkah's important teaching about mothers-in-law. And I'm sure many people will be hanging out with their mothers-in-law coming up on Pesach. So important wisdom to keep in mind. Okay, so this is the children chapter, and I wish I could have brought so much about it, but I could not. But we're going to see the Rishi Chokhmah. I haven't brought so much for you, but she quotes from the Rishi Chokhmah all the time. So I brought you here just like a little bio of the Rishi Chokhmah. It's a 16th century work, so it came out like right around when she was reading it. It must have been like really hot off the press, especially because it was written in Ottoman Palestine and she's sitting in Prague. So it's written by Rabbi Eliyahu Davidas. It's based largely on the Zohar, describes a method of meditation that combines visualization and permutation of Hebrew letters. It's intended to inspire the reader with a sense of purity and holiness. But I would say the Rishi Chokhmah also contains all sorts of other wisdom. And we'll look at some of it in a minute. But this must have been like the book that everyone was so excited about. Because she really quotes it. She quotes it by name more often than she quotes other Yiddish kind of moral literature, which is the genre she's participating in. So what is that about? Is it about everyone that has read the Rishi Chokhmah because it's like the Harry Potter of the time, it's the cultural kind of meme reference? Is it about she read it and she loved it and she just wants to teach it widely? Is it I don't know. I think there's like a lot of options. Is it something that, like, you know, all you prove how smart you are by quoting the Rishi Chokhmah? Like, kind of hard to say exactly why she goes back to it over and over again, particularly when we've seen that her bookshelf really is like much more expansive than we might have thought. Okay, anyways, let's start. So now I'd like to speak more about those things that the Rishi Chokhmah writes, how an upright woman who wants to raise her children to observe the Torah and to perform good deeds should exert herself. Pregnancy and giving birth are the simplest, LOL. Even an animal becomes pregnant and gives birth. And this is how the Gemara explains the verse that our dear Lord said to Eve when she ate the apple. I will make most severe your pangs. This means I will increase your pains. This refers to the raising of children, because raising children is essential and much depends on it, as I will write here. Your pregnancy means in Yiddish your pregnancy and refers to the arduousness of pregnancy. In pain shall you bear children. In Yiddish, this means you shall bear children with pain. Okay, so that's how she starts out with an interpretation of the curse to Chava Elisha Amar Harba Arba Etzbonich Ve'Hirunich Ve'etzeb Tel Divanim Ve'Elishech Teshukatech Uhu Im Sholbach. And the woman, God said, I'll greatly expand your hard labor and your pregnancies, and hardship shall you bear children. Yet your urge shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. And she adds in her own, then Meneket Rivkah adds in her own interpretation. So that was, and we'll look in a second, the Rishi Chochmah and the Gemara, and then she adds in her own thought. I could also explain the verse as follows. Your pangs means in Yiddish, your pain. This means that her menstruation causes her distress before she can dress herself in white and afterwards immerse herself. This is the greatest distress, because some women would rather become pregnant and have children if it were God's will. But we do not want to talk of this. One does not question God's judgment. We cannot understand it anyway. So what is your pangs? The pain is getting your period and once again not being pregnant. So on the one hand, she says, yes, I know raising children is so hard. It's much harder than getting pregnant and birthing children, but you know where the real pain is? The real pain is infertility. The real pain is getting your period and going through nida again when all you wish is that you could be pregnant. And she just has this one little paragraph about it, but she reads it like a midrash, as if like that's what the Torah is saying. It'll greatly expand your hard labor and your pregnancies, and hardship shall you bear children. Like, what is that hardship? She says it's the hardship of not bearing children, which I just think is such a beautiful and heartrending theme for her. We've been wondering, and we'll never really, or at least for now, we don't have evidence whether she had living children. It definitely seems like she knows what infertility feels like and how difficult it is to get your period when you were so wishing your period would be late or not come. And she doesn't have a great answer to it, right? She just says, but we do not want to talk about this. One does not question God's judgments. We cannot understand. So on the one hand, that seems like not a great answer. Don't you wish someone could understand? And on the other hand, it's so much better than people saying, oh, it's for the best. God meant it this way. You only get what you can handle. Like, no, you just this, we can't understand it. It's impossible to understand. And I think in a lot of ways, that's a very powerful answer to people struggling with infertility, struggling with all the theological questions that arise from infertility, is simply, humbly, we cannot understand. So I just wanted to kind of raise that as she's doing her classic thing here, where she quotes a verse, she brings in two explanations for it, and then she brings in her own, and her own is just, it's like quick, but it's arresting usually. I think this is really one of those moments where she just speaks to the female experience and to like hardship that women often suffer in silence. And she just raises it up. She says, yep, the Torah knows about us. The Torah knows about this part of our experience. This part of the infertility experience is there. And I'm reading it as a midrash into these psukim, which I think is just so beautiful. Okay, so I want to introduce you a little bit to the Rishi Chochmah, and you'll see why I said it's not all just like Zohar meditation. Some of it's just like kind of normal sounding wisdom literature. But here's the part that she's particularly quoting, or at least it seems like it. A person should always work hard to teach his son Torah. And you shouldn't neglect the duty because of the strain of raising children. It really resonates, by the way, right? Like children can just be like so overwhelming and so exhausting that it's like, where am I supposed to find time to learn with them also? I have to like put food on the table. It's not enough. And the answer is like, no, you have to do your hishtadlus to learn with your children. Even though it's very strenuous, and it's not just strenuous because it takes time. The first thing he's going to say is that it's strenuous because raising children is strenuous. But then he's going to say a second thing after that, right? Kidigarsinan bebreshit Rabbah, as we see in the midrash in Bereshit Rabbah, Elisha Amar harba to the woman, God said, I will greatly expand. It's vunei, hard. Zetzar ibor, this is the pain of pregnancy. Vaharonich, zetzar hanida, and in your labor, this is the pain of menstruation. Be'etzev, zetzar hanikalim, in hardship, this is the pain of miscarriage. Tildi, zetzar halida, you shall bear children. This is the pain of labor. And banim, zetzar gidul banim. Sons, this is the suffering of raising children. It's an amazing midrash because it's just like, yeah, there is no part of this that is not hard. You always think, oh, I'll get through the pregnancy and then I'll have the baby and it'll stop being hard. No, at no part does it stop being hard. Every single part is hard. And I think that just is very a phenomenal, important midrash. Okay, so anyways, that's just being quoted by the Rishi Chokhmah. And he's going to bring another piece. So Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Oh, this is about how strenuous it is to teach your kid Torah and to raise your kid. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Nochlo adam she'agdil legion achad shel zeitim begalil. It's easier for a person to grow a legion of olives. That could be like a lot. Maybe it's related to the word legion, but it doesn't seem like it's meant to be a lot. Not totally sure what the measurement is here. But the point is that olives don't grow in the Galilee because in the Galilee it's too cold for olives. So the point is that it's actually really hard to grow olives in the Galilee. It's harder to grow. It's easier to grow olives in the Galilee than it is to raise one Jewish baby, because actually the Tsa'ar Gidul Banim is extraordinary. And it's much harder than anything you do at work, which I think is also like a really beautiful lesson that actually like raising children is much harder than like doing really, really, really hard work all the time. And then he says, oh, and by the way, who carries the suffering and difficulty of raising children? Tsar Gidul Banim Rubohu Shel Isha. The suffering of raising children is mostly on women. Valkein Tzara Gadol, and therefore her reward is great. When she raises her children the appropriate path, she gets this kind of great reward from it, because this incredible suffering of raising children is mostly on her, not to mention that whole other list of sufferings that are entirely on her. And those are all read into being the curses of Eve. And that midrash has kind of a parallel in Eruvin 100b. And this is what, I mean, it seems like it's unclear in the Meneket Rivkah when she quotes the Gemara, right? Because all this stuff that she's quoting as the Gemara is kind of also that Bereshit Rabbah that the Bereshit Chokhmah is quoting. So like maybe she's not actually quoting the Gemara, she's actually quoting Bereshit Rabbah into the and it's really just the continuation of the Bereshit Chokhmah. Or maybe she's referring to a Gemara that's slightly different. So here we have the Gemara in Eruvin 100b. So Amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi Eser Kolot Nid Kalalach Chava. Eve was cursed with 10 curses. Dichtiv Elisha Amar Harba Arba, as it says, I will greatly multiply Harba Arba. And he says, okay, so what's the first one? Shnei tipei damim echad dam nida ve'echad dam betulim. 2 drops of blood, 1 menstruation, and 1 virginity. Itzvonich zetzar gidul banim, your pain, this is the pain of raising children. Veheronich zetzar ha'ivor, ve'etzev tildi banim, right? And your labor, this is the pain of pregnancy. In sorrow shall you bring forth children, and according to its plain meaning, i.e., the pain of childbirth. So, it's very similar to what we quoted in Bereshit Rabbah, rather, which was quoted in the Bereshit Chokhmah, but maybe she really was familiar also with this Gemara in Eruvin and is actually saying, yeah, like for whatever reason, right? Like I wish the Bereshit Chokhmah were quoting this, or if I were the Bereshit Chokhmah, I would quote this. Potentially, hard to say exactly. Okay, so just a few more things about children, because she offers, the first one is like, this is all really, really hard. And she has this whole teaching about how hard it is and how that hardship comes from Eve and all of that. But then she goes on to have some really practical wisdom. So I just wanted to bring that for you. I'm obviously like very interested in her Torah and her citation, but bottom line, she has a lot to say. She has a lot to say about nursing, but I didn't bring that in. I wish I had read it more in depth before I taught my Feeding Babies course, because I totally would have brought her in for that. Okay, but here we go. I would like to speak about things that I learned from the venerable doctor, our teacher and master, Rabbi Samuel, namely how one should bathe a child. One should not bathe the child in water that is too hot, since it can make the child weak and sluggish. And one should not wet its head at all, because its brain is soft and much bad, and that should be much bad, God forbid, comes of it, so that I will not write here what, God protect us, comes of it. When one takes it out of the bath, one may wash it carefully, meaning the head, I think. One should also not leave it in the bath for too long. She's very concerned, like, babies are delicate, their bodies are delicate. You could like cook your baby into a mush, like don't do that. Be really, really careful with its head, all of that. And here, but it's so interesting, like what is she particularly kind of concerned about is she's really concerned that you all have some kind of injury or problem with your child. And then here's what'll happen. It's also very necessary to tell young women to take care of a child like the shell of an egg, because one can, God forbid, harm the child very quickly. And then afterwards, they say it has grown on him, or they say someone cast an evil eye on it. And then they bring an old Gentile woman and have her cast a spell on it. And this is the problem. This is a major sin, and I would like to keep far apart from such things. Our Holy Torah forbade it to us numerous times. So what's the problem? Your child, you'll do something stupid to your child. Your child will get injured. You'll try to avoid taking the blame for it. So you'll blame it on this thing just happened to him. There's an evil eye. Oh, how do I get rid of the evil eye? Let me bring in a Gentile witch doctor. And she said, do not bring in a Gentile witch doctor. Gentile witch doctors are totally, totally prohibited according to the Torah. And that's what so on the one hand, she's happy to quote this Jewish doctor, Rabbi Samuel, right? She's not like anti-medical knowledge. She's anti like spells and incantations. And like in the 1500s, there wasn't such a huge difference between those two things. Like those really had to be like teased apart. Like what is magic and what is medicine? Not so simple to separate those concepts. And so for her, she separates it here by like Jew and Gentile, it seems. And maybe that's like a fair understanding. I'm not a history of science kind of person, but I do think that's kind of an interesting piece of what's going on here. Liz, I see you smiling. If you want to jump in, feel free. Okay. All right. Moving right along, we have two more chapters. Her chapter on daughters-in-law is almost like the opposite of her chapter on mothers-in-law. Like it's all about keeping the peace. Just keep the peace, keep the peace. But also, okay, she has a great thing about rebuke in this chapter that's just like really special. So I brought it for you. Now, every woman should be aware and make sure that she does not sin against her son or daughter-in-law, God forbid. As we see regarding King Saul, peace be upon him, who hated his son-in-law, King David. Also, like, what a brilliant model. If I said to you, like, think up like the paradigm to learn from in terms of like parent son-in-law relationships, like who would you think of? We don't have that many daughters who have stories in the Torah, but obviously King Saul and King David, that's just brilliant that King Saul had a daughter named Michal. She's married to King David, and we know like way more about them in their relationship. It's just phenomenal. It's totally brilliant. If you said to me who's like the paradigm father-in-law, son-in-law relationship in Tanakh, I would not have pulled out King Saul and King David, but it's absolutely right. And I mean, paradigm in a bad way, right? But anyway, okay. And much bad came from that. He caused himself and his children to sin. Nothing good comes from conflict, only jealousy and hatred. Even if a daughter or son-in-law does not always do the right thing, one should judge them favorably. One should also remember, if they had as much experience as we do, they would probably change, which is great. One should admonish them kindly and alone, not in front of others. And if you want to say to them, you goy, you apostate, why did you do this? The way one would to a truly evil person, you shouldn't. And if you were to speak angrily to him, he would not accept your criticism and would become even worse and even more stubborn. So a few takeaways from this. When you're going to rebuke someone, rebuke them in private. I think that's always really wise thing to do. And you should do it as if they're at heart. I don't know if people pay attention to like Dr. Becky Good Inside, like that's her whole philosophy, right? Is like people are good inside and kids are good inside. And it's all about like recognizing that they're good inside and they're good people who did bad things and helping them see that about themselves. And that creates confident, well-adjusted kids is her theory, at least. But I think there's a lot of that coming out here. Like, don't criticize people as if they're evil people. Criticize people and rebuke them as if they're good people who did something wrong, and then they'll be able to grow from it and they'll know that you believe in them, and that will help them understand and want to follow what you're saying to them because they know that you believe in them. So I think there's just like a lot of great wisdom in that one little paragraph. Okay, so her last piece is about household staff, and she draws it from that whole last chapter is full of quotes from Isha Chayil, which is really, really interesting. I think if you said to me, like, where do we look for sources about women and their household staff, I would have said, like, I don't know, are like Bilhah and Zilpah household staff? Like maybe that would have been like the model I would have first thought of, where we see women having like people who work for them. And that's not where she goes. So here's how she gets there. This will speak of how a woman should supervise her household staff. Many women have done well, but you surpass them all. Rabot banut asuchayil va'at alit al kulana. This means many daughters of Israel own much money and property, but you are praised above them all. King Solomon, peace be upon him, spoke the verse about an unflawed woman. Right. So who is the Isha Chayil? She is an unflawed woman who is not only concerned for herself and her children, but thinks of and is concerned even for others who are not related to her. So in this like menorah structure that we've been building, 5 out of the 6 branches are people that she's related to, her husband, right? It's all people that she would sit Shiva for, more or less, except for her father-in-law and daughter-in-law or whatever, her in-law relationships, but it's her husband, her parents, her children, her in-laws, and her daughters-in-law, right? Those are the relationships we've seen, daughters and son-in-law. Those are the relationships we've seen so far. And here we're saying, what about people who you don't share any blood with them? I will, God willing, write about this. Until now, we've spoken about how a woman should conduct herself and how she should relate to her husband, father, mother, mother-in-law, father-in-law, and her children, her son-in-law, and daughter-in-law. She could then think to herself, I do not need to concern myself with anything else. We find such attitudes often. May the merciful one save us from such a view. Rachamana litzlar mihai data. This means in Yiddish, God, blessed be his name, should protect us from such views. We see clearly in our Holy Torah that God, blessed be he, warned us many times about this and said, love your fellow as yourself. And what does v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha mean? It does not mean your parents, and it does not mean your in-laws. It means people who aren't related to you. You're supposed to care about them as well. An old woman who is righteous and does as I have written will make peace in her tent, and she will also merit having peace in the world to come. In recompense of this, we will merit the redemption of the Messiah, who will make peace in the whole world, and we will merit rebuilding the temple, and the Shekhinah will once again reside amongst Israel. That's that Kabbalistic idea of the Shekhinah and God kind of reuniting. The Master of Peace will teach us and reveal to us the Torah that is only peace. As the verse says, all her ways are pleasant, all her paths are peaceful. Amen, so may it be his will. That's the end of the book. She quotes Derachea Darchei Noam b'chol netivotei shalom. Normally, when we say Derachea Darchei Noam b'chol netivotei shalom, we are talking about the Torah. And she is here too, right? The Master of Peace will teach us and reveal to us the Torah that is only peace. How do we know the Torah is only peace? B'chol netivotei shalom. But I think she's doing something else here, which is in these chapters, a recurring theme, which we saw some of in the like mother-in-law, daughter-in-law chapters, is this heavy emphasis on peace. yes, you could like stoke anger and resentment and make fights between people. You could do that. Or you can say to them, figure it out, rebuke them gently, trust that they're good on the inside. And then what does that make the ideal woman? Also, just like the Torah, her ways are pleasant ways and all her paths peaceful. So I think that she's picking up on that recurrent theme of women are meant to be not just builders, but also peacemakers, and that women like the Torah, kol netivot shalom, and that is the old woman who is righteous, who is making peace in her tent, and she will have peace in the world to come. And that's the dream. That's the dream for Rabbanit Rebecca. We should all have peace in our tents here and in the world to come, and in all of our paths as well. Okay, so that is what I have prepared for you. I purposely wanted to just give you little tastes so that you could kind of whet your appetite. And I think, it's wonderful to, if you can and whatever, to buy the book, in part because the message that sends to the world is, if you print these books, they will sell. And that means that more and more of this literature that's being unearthed, written by women, will get published. So I think that's really important. And the other piece that it says when you have a book like this on your bookshelf is there were women writing sefarim in the 1500s and they belong on the shelf. Put it right next to your Maharal because they were living at the same time. Or if you have a Rishi Chokhmah, you can put it right in between. And to say, like they belong on the walls of our midrash, if only we make space for them. And so I'll open this up for about 8 minutes of questions if people have any. But thank you all so much for kind of coming along on this journey with me. This is my first time, obviously, ever teaching this text. And I think my goal going forward is I don't know that I will so often be like teaching straight this work, but to really like try and weave her in to when I'm teaching kind of topical issues, to weave her in on topical matters, or as like a commentator if I'm quoting something that she discusses or something like that, to be like, oh yeah, like here's this verse, here's like Rabot Banu Rasuchayel Atalit Al Kuana. Oh, you know what the Meneket Rivkah says about this, like she says this and someone else says the other, and to really kind of like use her Torah and her wisdom and bring it into conversation with a library that she was kind of forgotten from, but that has plenty to say about all the issues that she's talking about. So to really bring her back into the place she deserves in that conversation. That's my personal goal going forward. So if you take other classes with me at Teresa, you might be hearing from me about her again. And yeah, so if anyone has questions, now would be a great time. Give me a second.
If you're here in the room with us, feel free to unmute yourself, or if you're having difficulty with that, you can flag me down and I will help you out there. We do have one question that came in through the Q&A feature. Where can folks get a copy of this book?
Great. So here's what it looks like. It's published by JPS. It looks a little funky because I think they were trying to like recreate the original cover. Like this is like similar to the design that was on the original like Yiddish front cover of the book. So it just doesn't totally like look the way a normal book looks now. But yeah, so it's published by JPS. And in the back of the book is like the Yiddish. Ooh, I'm sorry. And then in the front there is the English. And oh, great, thank you. And then there's also this like really extensive introduction by Frauke von Rohden, who also wrote notes along with the English. So it's not a totally cheap book, but it's also not priced as an academic book. Like it's like I think $40 and not $80. So it's, maybe it's like an afikoman present instead of like something you're gonna just like, oh, whatever, it's $10, I'll just get it. Yeah, Emily. Huh.
So, I can't remember, and I think I missed one class if you dealt with this, but who quotes her? Like, are there any of her contemporaries or over the next, centuries? Is she quoted by anybody, by any of the mainstream No.
No. She gets quoted by a little bit contemporaries, not really any like big name people. And then she was preserved by the Christian Hebraists. So they are interested in this genre of like Yiddish morality literature. But think about it like this, right? Like the people who we study from her time are these like intellectual elites who are, you know, like what was taking up the Maharal's time, you know, like he was creating these like Mishnah study groups around Prague, and like he was trying to get people to engage with like the classics of our literature. And this book probably at the time felt to people like the pink art scroll book, you know, like that doesn't belong on the walls of the baby drash. That's like lady Torah, and they can like hide it under their hats, you know. So this never made it.
I know a lot of men who quote those art scrolls books, but whatever.
The pink ones, yeah.
I don't know which pink ones, whatever.
No, but I mean the pink ones in the sense that they're by women for women. And so yeah, so that's what, like I don't, you know, like I guess I am like kind of making fun of art scroll, but like I don't really, you know, like they publish a lot of like really great like serious stuff, and this would not have been considered in that genre at the time. Like, I don't think that men were studying what she was writing. At least it doesn't seem like it. It's hard to say exactly, in part because we don't know who some of the men who are mentioned are. So in the dedication, it says like, this guy put up all of the money for this book, but like we don't know who he is. So some of that is just a mystery, but we do know that this book was more or less lost to history. Like we had mentions of it, and then like they found in the JTS library an incomplete copy of it, and then in a library in Bavaria in Erlangen they found a full copy of it, and that's what this is based off of. So we don't have like loads and loads of this book, where it's all just kind of guessing and making assumptions about how people used it, how many were printed, any of that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Thanks.
So we have another fun question, I think. How did you discover the book?
I first heard about the Meneket Rivkah when I was in Tiktin, which is a town in Poland, and the synagogue in Tiktin is still standing. So I went to Poland with a group during my gap year, and in that synagogue they told us about Rebecca of Tiktin as if she had lived there, which doesn't quite seem to be right, but whatever, that's fine, right? Because you only get a toponym of being like of Tiktin if you're no longer in Tiktin, and we know that she was like buried in Prague and whatever. Anyways, it seems like she was in Prague and not in Tiktin, but maybe her family, likely her family is from there. And so that's when I first heard about her. There was not a great like translation of this work available at that time. They didn't really tell us anything about her other than that she wrote the first book by a woman. So I knew it existed. And then when it came out, I saw it somewhere and was like, oh, that's incredible. I want to read this new translation of the Meneket Rivkah, and got myself a copy. And then the reason why I'm teaching it now is because at Risha, we were like, oh, maybe we should teach about like a theme. So we were like, oh, maybe we'll teach about piety. And I said, I have a manual for wisdom and piety. And so that's kind of how this class developed, and then I kind of got into it in preparing for this, so I'm really glad I had that thought and that idea. The other thing I'll mention is that this idea that or like the way that she refers to herself as Harabani, and when she writes her introduction as Haftamat Harabani, like that's been very influential for me to know that this first woman's book, she is called her Rabbanit, and not because of who her husband was. Like that really influenced like the professional title that I chose to use. And I find that like a very meaningful kind of like piece of our women Torah learning heritage. Yeah, Liz.
So first of all, thank you. This was amazing. Second of all, I was like super interested in the way that you'd bring her not quite midrashim, where she's doing midrash, and then her own midrash. So first of all, I was wondering, like, how often does she do that in the book, and where else does it come up? And also just wanted to name this like fascinating trend where women sort of keep rediscovering the idea of we can actually write midrash as midrash and then redoing it, which is so interesting that there's this 400-year gap and then we do it again. Like, does it exist elsewhere? I hope so. Like, I hope we find more versions of it, but it's so fascinating to see this particular approach strongly resonate with women in particular.
Yeah. I mean, so when she refers to herself as Hadarshanit, that's actually what she means. Like, she means I make and teach midrashim, and presumably she wasn't the only like Zogarkar for Zogarin who was doing that, right? Like, you have this whole, or we at least understand, or we think that there's a whole oral culture of the Torah readings happening over there. Okay, guys, like, let me tell you about the Parsha. So presumably there were lots and lots and lots of women doing that, coming up with their own homiletic teachings, saying over the Parsha to the other women around in a way that they would understand. Like, it wasn't just, okay, let me read to you the Tzana or Enna. It seems like these women were, which by the way, doesn't even exist for her yet. That's why she doesn't quote it. It comes after her. And it's not written by women anyways, it's for women. Like, it seems like these women were actually doing this creative work, and then she happens to write it down, and she's doing it very knowledgeably because she knows like all this other material that comes before, and she does it all over. And much of the time she'll say, no, here's this, and like, here's my approach. And I brought you, I think maybe 2 of them, like one last week, one this week. But there's way more than that. Most psukim that she quotes, she'll quote a midrash and she'll quote her own like original take also. But you have to know what you're like. You have to do. This is what I said to the students at Brandeis: is like, in order to appreciate what she's doing, you have to do the work. I brought for you here all the stuff she's citing, and in order to like appreciate how original what she's bringing in is, you have to know that like those original sources, they talk about the pain of menstruation, but they don't talk about it from a perspective of infertility. They talk about nefalim, they talk about miscarriages in either Breshit Rabbah talks about miscarriages, but they don't talk about the person who actually never gets pregnant in the first place, which is actually quite different. It just has a different flavor to it. The like loss of a miscarriage has like a tangibility to it, which versus like, okay, I just got my period again. Like, there's no obvious like thing that died there in the same way, right? So just she's like adding in this whole other layer that's original to her, that's not in there, and that's because she sees the lack in it, which I just think is so awesome. But you actually have to like do the work to see what she's doing there.
Okay, so are there any final questions before we wrap up? I'm going to give some folks.
And if you have other thoughts or questions, you can always find me at sarna@risha.org.
Okay, wonderful. So thank you, Rabbanit Sarna, for a fascinating and pretty unique class, not just among Drisha's offerings, but among the offerings of the world in general. And thank you to all of you for participating in our learning community and engaging with us. If you just cannot get enough of learning with Rabbanit Sarna, you are in luck. Your next opportunity to learn with her at Drisha is tomorrow at 2:30 p.m. when she will be joining Rabbanit Sarah Wilkenfeld for this week's Conversations on the Parsha. They're always great together, so I can't wait to hear what they come up with. Also of note, this upcoming Sunday, the annual Rappaport Family Memorial Lecture will be happening at noon Eastern. That will be delivered by Rabbi Nathan Laufer, and it will be on a topic pertinent to Passover. So I know some of us still don't really want to think about that, but we should be getting prepared emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, if not doing the cleaning. And you're welcome to join us for that and any other offerings that we have remaining. You can learn more and sign up at our website, drisha.org. Be well. Have a great night.